Hello, everybody. I've been a senior judge since 2014, and I've been involved in the rules area for quite a lot longer, having been on the former Dressage Canada Rules Committee and then transferring these skills over to being the de facto rules person working with the Dressage Committee since 2016. So it doesn't mean that I am perfect to know all this stuff. It means that I've got enough experience to know where to look for things. So rules, we love them and we hate them. We need them so that we can provide a safe, fun, and level field of play for all involved. And that is always the intent of any rules proposed in any sports. Today, we're just dealing with the new rules that have come up for 2022. But before we get there, there are usually three ways that changes to rules at Equestrian Canada occur. The first one is from member input, and these are usually rules that have come in usually between January and May, but come in all year round. And they can be just something that happened to you at a show that didn't seem right. And they could be almost anything. And once received, these rule change proposals are first reviewed by our technical people in sport operations and then distributed out to the committees involved. And they'll decide whether they're really good and need implementing and they will proceed, or whether they need some amendment or they're just not appropriate at this time. Often, a somewhat contentious item may have real merit, but requires more input or perhaps a pilot to find out if it should proceed. It may also require input from health and welfare or another EC committee to promote the welfare of the horse or fairness to athletes. Usually these internal changes, the internal changes are usually dated during the same time, but they can be for policy changes or new programs coming up, and it's just to update the rule book. FEI changes that might affect the EC rules, generally speaking, we follow FEI changes that make competition easier or more fair to competitors. They usually aren't known until FEI has approved them in November each year, and they're the last changes we make before the next season. USEF changes also impact EC competitions, and although they usually say the same things in a different format, we try very hard because of our cross competition riders to try and make it as easy as possible. And many of you will have already looked at the very comprehensive USEF, USDF, a visual guide to 2022 dress attire. And the allowance of any single colored coat can seem too broad for many in our conservative sport, but still no wild designs allowed. So back to the very beginning of the rule book, and we'll just stay in sequence. The whole of chapter 1 is copied from the FEI rule book. Sometimes, though, we need to make slight changes for various reasons. And this here, just the wording on the turn on the haunches, it actually came up in a recent judge's exam because it didn't sound right, because it was different from FEI. And the reason it was put in was because in our tests now, which are all USEF tests, the turn on the haunches allows for a larger radius than FEI describes. And therefore, we made a note of this so that anyone writing an exam or writing a test will know that there is a slight difference there. The other FEI adjustment was one that is completely international, and our international judges had been talking about for some time, the use of cadence in Piaf. This has now been changed to rhythmical and regularity and a true commitment. So moving along to the part that most of you will have most familiarity with already for this year, the fun part is the color in our competitions. And so basically, this again is all from FEI. Youssef has taken it on and we have taken on. There's barely any difference between any of them. So riders at all test levels can have a jacket or vest in any single color with pinstriping, checks, or tweeds. You can't have stripes or multicolored coats or shiny things. Tasteful or discreet accents, including crystal, are acceptable. So the next few changes are for FEI tests that are ridden in Canadian competition. So in the young rider to Grand Prix, any single color jacket and a short cutaway with short tails or a tailcoat is fine. Same coloring, same contrasting colors and points. Then when you come to the interesting point here is that gloves in FEI are allowed to be black, brown, or white in FEI tests. Your boots now can match your jackets, and that includes some decoration. When you come to the FEI children and pony, all much the same, except of course they can't use tails. And in the more national part of our dress rules, again, it's the same except for no tails at the national levels. I just want to bring your attention a little bit to the headings in 4.1.3 and in 4.1.4, in that these titles don't quite match the class levels that are listed in the chart 3 for classes allowable in competitions. This will be updated for 2023, but it's not a huge change. It's small things, but it does make a slight difference. So do look at the chart as well as this when you're entering your competitions. So for instance, in a bronze show in 4.1.4, it's quite common for FEI tests to be ridden, but please note that young horse tests are still not allowable at bronze competitions. And this is usually because the judge at a bronze competition is not always a senior judge, and senior or FEI judges are required to judge young horse tests. That does not include Materiel, which a senior judge can, another judge can judge. It's just the young horse tests. And then moving along to saddlery and equipment, do also note that we provide the link to the US annex, which gives a visual description of most of the saddlery and clothing requirements. The saddlery is in the annex, And they also have a visual guide to 2022 dress attire, and these are very useful. Only a very few equipment amendments have been made this year, and these usually arise from member or steward questions throughout the previous year. And there had often been some confusion over comfort bridles and whether a jowl strap is equivalent to a throat latch. And it is, and therefore it's been adjusted so that there will not be any confusion going forward. And the next one, you may wonder why on earth it's there, but it's because some older versions of curb bits used to have longer upper cheek pieces, which are believed to create excessive pressure, and therefore there is a limit on the length of the upper arm. And in stirrups, when the colored stirrups first came out, I think they were in a rosy gold and a pretty blue metallic color. And it was thought, oh, why not encourage in the bronze competitions? Well, there are so many lovely choices these days. It really seemed unnecessary to limit it just to the bronze competition. So that's simply been deleted. And then moving along to people with hearing impairment, which isn't always just in master classes, but it is specified here for master classes. They may use headsets if the competition organizer is able to appoint a supervisor to stand with the caller. And the reason for that is so that the caller cannot or should not coach the rider in between calling the tests. A doctor's certificate indicating the athlete's hearing impairment must be submitted with the entry, and the steward and judge must also be advised so that no one is called out for having equipment that's not allowable when indeed they have got an allowance. In random checks, these were introduced in 2019, and they were mixed but positive results mainly. But rather than continue as a pilot, the ruling simply got adjusted so that it's effective now this year with agreement between the organizing committees and the stewards, whether it will be a random tack checks or complete tack checks of every competitor. We'd really appreciate more feedback on how this is working in the field. So if you have an issue with this or you think it's really working well, we'd really like to have feedback. And we like good feedback as well as bad feedback. So that would be really nice. In the para-dressage area in bronze competitions, the para committee wished to expand the level of tests allowable to give athletes more exposure to equivalent FEI and riding for the disabled tests. So 3 more tests have been added to those allowable in bronze competitions. It's a really, really good move because many of our para-dressage athletes compete ultimately very successfully on the international stage. And this will encourage more para-equestrians to simply try the FEI tests in public. Also in para-dressage, we used to have the requirement that an armband in a distinct color be worn by only grade 4 and 5 athletes with visual impairment. This has now been removed so that it is a requirement for all para athletes with visual impairments to use the distinctive colored armband. So the safety stirrups, there are so many new stirrups that are on the horizon now. With para, You just have to be completely clear that they always have closed branches and no attachments. It's always, the key is that the athlete must be able to fall free of these stirrups, so they cannot be held in. And do check the current rules before assuming that all of the current safety stirrups on the market currently are allowable. In Chapter 7, there's just a very tiny change to clarify the measurement of horses and the ages of horses within all classes. So to be eligible to compete in a dressage class, a horse has to be a minimum of 3 years old. And minimum age for a horse competing in FEI junior tests is 6. And for PSG, 7, and above intermediate is 8. And for a pony may compete at PSG once it's 7 years old. The next slide explains the reason why the Fei Error Scale was changed. Back in the year that FEI introduced their, what we considered a punitive error scale of 2% for the first error and then disqualification after the second, the dressage committee checked with some other national federations to see what they were doing. And we had direct contact with the UK and Germany, and they were using their own national error scale. And that's what we chose to do. And in doing so, we created a label to go over the error scale in any FEI tests that were being run at Canadian competitions. This did create some issues in that some organizing committees simply did not know that we had that, or that we'd dealt with it, and or they were, particularly at the PTSO shows where they're not under our sanction, they would simply use the FEI tests with no label over them. So it just became very confusing. And so we've simply decided after a few years that every FEI test ridden in an Equestrian Canada competition will be using the FEI error scale quoted on that test. It was also awkward for the many competitions that are using software packages to try to adhere to the changes that we had made. So I think this will make life more simple for both athletes and organizing committees. Also, the difference, there is still a difference between the national tests and the FEI tests, particularly in the errors of test, where each incurs a 2 penalty point in national classes, but if you were in an FEI test, it's 0.5% in an FEI class ridden at a national competition. So just be aware that there are differences. And then there are a couple of clarifications in the errors and penalties section. And mostly these are not checking in with the steward after being eliminated. Obviously, when you're eliminated because your horse is lame, you're really upset. And this step can easily be missed, but it is required. And obviously the stewards are very compassionate when this happens. And resistance too. This if a horse is eliminated for resistance during the test, again, the rider is going to be very upset. But they still have to need to check in with the steward. But the one thing that has been deleted is that if a horse has completed a perfectly acceptable or perhaps superb test and then spooks on the way out of the arena, before they could get disqualified. And this has now been deleted. I think that's a great relief to everybody. And then again, if there were blood showing, here again, an athlete's going to be mortified if they're being eliminated for sight of blood. And still, though, they need to go to the steward, who will be compassionate about such a thing. And moving along to the Materiel class, chapter 12. This chapter hadn't been updated in many, many years. So when two of our really well-respected judges offered to update it, it was the perfect opportunity. So this is a complete rewrite, and we're really thankful to Doreen Horsey and Brenda Miner for doing this. Thank you both very much, if you ever look at this. And then the next one is the Master's Test of Choice. And this is a brand new section that was run as a pilot last year. And it was the brainchild of a really well-known competitor and coach, Wendy Christoph, who had enjoyed coaching an elderly gentleman who wanted to progress up the levels. But some accommodations needed to make the experience more enjoyable for both he and his horse. And so this is what we came up with, or mainly Wendy and her associates. So the Master's Test of Choice is a class that provides senior riders over 60 to participate in a dressage class just for them at their own level and a fair playing field with some allowances, such as they may sit to the trot, they may have two whips if needed, they may have collars, and they may have a headset, and they may use their voice, and a few other pieces that you'll see on the slide. It's really to encourage people to enjoy our sport for as long as they're able to, and why not? So finally, into the conflict of interest area, judges have always been allowed to compete and judge at competitions that they either want to ride in and judge, but they're not allowed to judge in classes that they compete in, obviously. And this is just allowing judges who are entered in silver classes may also judge in a gold or bronze class. It's just allowing all judges to judge in all classes as long as they're not judging in classes that they enter. It's just broadening the field a little bit. And then in guest cards, this is really disappointing for all Canadian dressage judges, because we had a wonderful reciprocal agreement with USEF whereby we could judge in the States and they could judge here with reciprocal responsibilities and obligations. This now no longer exists. An official who wishes to get an EC license. Sorry, I'm getting that mixed up there. An EC judge now has to apply to USEF and go through their qualifications to be able to judge in the States now. Whereas a USEF licensed judge still may obtain a guest card to judge in an Equestrian Canada competition. EC continues to work with USEF to improve the judging reciprocity, but USEF is really preferring that their competitions hire mainly their own judges. So, and that completes all of the rule changes for 2022. I hope this is of some help.